The Outsider Princess. The great hall of the Velthran Empire stretched vast and imposing, its metal walls adorned with the trophies of 1,000 conquered worlds. Crystalline light fixtures cast harsh shadows across the gathered assembly of Velthran nobility, each standing at least 8 feet tall, their scaled bodies rippling with muscle beneath ceremonial armor. Their culture had been forged in the crucible of combat, refined through millennia of conquest, and defined by a single principle: strength determines worth. In the center of the hall stood Princess Linar, heir to the Velthran throne. She looked up at Chancellor Vorn, watching his expression shift from disappointment to barely concealed disgust. "Unacceptable," he declared, his voice reverberating through the chamber. "The bloodline has weakened. Look at her, barely 6 feet tall. How can one so small command the Imperial forces? How can she inspire fear in our enemies?" Linar maintained her composure despite the familiar sting of rejection. At 25 cycles, she was of age to take a mate and solidify her claim to the throne. But this marked the 12th rejection ceremony she had endured. Emperor Thaxon, her father, shifted uncomfortably on his throne. Once the mightiest warrior in the empire, age had bent his massive frame, though none would dare mention it. "My daughter possesses keen intelligence and diplomatic skill," he offered, but his voice lacked conviction. "Intelligence," Vorn sneered. "Diplomacy. These are the tools of the weak. The empire was not built through talk, but through strength of arms." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the great hall. Linar kept her head high, though inside she felt the familiar hollowness spreading. She had spent her life trying to compensate for her small stature. She had studied military strategy, mastered 6 languages of neighboring systems, and developed policies that had expanded trade across 3 sectors without a single battle. Yet none of it mattered in the eyes of her people. "The ceremony is concluded," Emperor Thaxon announced, his voice heavy with resignation. "We will reconvene when another suitable candidate is found." As the assembly dispersed, Linar caught the whispers trailing in her wake. "The runt princess. A shame for the emperor. Perhaps the throne should pass to General Kroth instead." Linar walked with measured steps from the great hall, her personal guard flanking her. Massive warriors assigned to protect the fragile princess. Only when she reached her private chambers did she allow her shoulders to slump. "Another rejection," observed Mira, her attendant, and the only Velthran who had never treated her with pity or disdain. "They are fools, Your Highness." "They are Velthrans," Linar corrected, removing her ceremonial headdress. "And they see me as I am, small, weak, unsuitable. They see only with their eyes, not with their minds," Mira replied, her voice soft despite her towering frame. "The Emperor recognizes your value, even if tradition binds his hands." Linar moved to the viewport that dominated one wall of her chambers. Beyond the crystalline pane stretched the capital city of Velth, a sprawling metropolis of metal and stone rising from the rocky landscape. Above the jagged skyline hung the orbital shipyards, where the Imperial fleet grew ever larger. "The diplomatic delegation from Earth arrives tomorrow," Mira said, interrupting Linar's thoughts. Humans. Linar had studied them extensively, a relatively new spacefaring species that had surprised the galactic community with their rapid technological advancement and unexpected military victories against the Crataxi horde. "Father assigned me as liaison, did he not?" "Yes." The council objected. "Of course." "Of course," Linar echoed. "But diplomatic duties are beneath most warriors. Besides, humans are small like me. Perhaps Father thinks I'll make them comfortable. Perhaps he recognizes that you speak their language and understand their customs better than any military commander who would rather intimidate than negotiate." Linar allowed herself a small smile. "Perhaps." Commander Elias Hayes of the United Earth Defense Force stood at rigid attention as the shuttle docked with the Velthran orbital station. His dress uniform felt stiff, but not nearly as uncomfortable as the tension radiating from Admiral Voss beside him. "Remember the protocol," Voss muttered. "Show respect, but never deference. These Velthrans respect strength above all. Yes, sir, Hayes replied, mentally reviewing the diplomatic briefing. The Velthrans were a warrior culture, physically imposing and militarily formidable. Earth needed this alliance. The Cretaxi were pushing toward the Orion Arm, and humanity's colonies would be directly in their path. The shuttle door slid open, and Hayes got his first direct view of their hosts. The briefings hadn't quite captured the sheer scale of the Velthrans. The smallest stood at least 7.5 feet tall, their bodies covered in fine scales that shimmered between bronze and deep crimson. Each wore what appeared to be ceremonial armor, though Hayes suspected it was fully functional. "Welcome to Velthran Prime," rumbled the largest of the welcoming party, his universal translator giving his words a metallic edge. "I am General Croth, commander of the Imperial Fleet." Admiral Voss stepped forward, executing a perfect Velthran salute, fist to chest, then extended outward. "Admiral Helena Voss of the United Earth Defense Force. We bring greetings from Earth and her colonies." Hayes followed suit, noting how Croth's eyes narrowed slightly as they fell upon him. At 6'2", Hayes was tall by human standards, but practically diminutive next to the Velthrans. "You will be escorted to the surface," Croth stated. "The Emperor has assigned his daughter as your liaison." Something in his tone suggested this was not an honor. The journey to the surface passed in tense silence. Hayes studied the Velthrans covertly, noting their rigid posture and the ceremonial blades they all carried, symbols of their status as warriors. The capital city sprawled beneath them as they descended, a marvel of engineering with structures that seemed to defy gravity. The shuttle landed at the Imperial Palace, a fortress of gleaming metal and stone that dominated the city center. The delegation was led through towering corridors where the ceilings soared nearly 30 feet high. Velthran guards lined the passageway, each standing motionless like living statues, their eyes tracking the humans with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. Finally, they entered what appeared to be a reception hall, smaller than the main chambers but still impressive by human standards. Standing at the center was a Velthran female who immediately caught Hayes' attention, not for her size, but for her striking difference from the others. Her Imperial Highness, Princess Lenar of the House of Thaxon, first daughter of Emperor Thaxon the Unyielding, announced a Velthran official. The princess stood only about 6 feet tall, towering over most humans, but petite by Velthran standards. Her scales held a more iridescent quality, shifting between copper and gold in the light. Despite her smaller stature, she carried herself with unmistakable dignity. "Welcome to Velthran Prime," she said in perfect, unaccented English, surprising the human delegation. "I trust your journey was comfortable." Admiral Voss stepped forward. "Your Highness, we are honored by your welcome. Allow me to present Commander Elias Hayes, my second-in-command and our security specialist." Hayes bowed slightly, following the protocol for addressing Velthran royalty. When he straightened, he found the princess studying him with intelligent eyes. "Commander," she acknowledged, "I have studied your recent campaigns against the Cretaxi. Your tactical innovations at the Battle of Proxima Centauri were impressive." Hayes blinked in surprise. "You've studied our military history, Your Highness." A subtle smile touched her lips. "I have studied many things, Commander. Knowledge is a weapon often overlooked." She turned to address the entire delegation. "You must be weary from your journey. My attendants will show you to your accommodations. We will begin formal discussions tomorrow after you have rested." As the princess spoke, Hayes noticed several Velthran officials exchanging glances. There was something in their expressions, dismissal, perhaps even embarrassment, when they looked at their princess. The delegation was led to a wing of the palace that had clearly been modified for human comfort. The ceilings were lower, the furniture scaled appropriately. Hayes was assigned a spacious chamber with a viewport overlooking the city. Admiral Voss called a brief meeting once they were settled. "Initial impressions," she asked her team. "They're trying to intimidate us with all this." The diplomatic officer gestured vaguely. "Grandeur. Standard practice for a warrior culture," said Dr. Chen, their xenoanthropologist. The princess is interesting, though. Did you notice how the other Velthrons reacted to her? Hayes nodded. They seemed almost embarrassed. Because of her size, I'm guessing. Precisely, Chen confirmed. In a culture that values physical strength and stature, she's an anomaly. The fact that she's been assigned to us might be telling. They may not value diplomatic roles highly. Their loss, our gain, Voss decided. She speaks our language perfectly and seems well-informed. Work with her, Hayes. Build rapport. We need this alliance. Yes, Admiral. Later that evening, Hayes found himself restless. The gravity on Velfrin Prime was slightly higher than Earth standard, making everything feel heavier, including his thoughts. He decided to explore the areas of the palace open to the delegation. As he wandered through a corridor lined with what appeared to be historical artifacts, he was surprised to encounter Princess Linner studying a tactical display. She quickly deactivated it when she noticed him. Commander Hayes, she acknowledged. I didn't expect any of your delegation to be exploring at this hour. I hope I'm not intruding, Your Highness. Not at all. Perhaps it's fortunate. I had hoped to speak with you more directly, away from the formal settings. Hayes raised an eyebrow. About what, if I may ask? About the reality of our potential alliance. She gestured for him to follow her to a viewing alcove that overlooked the city. What you see here, the grandeur, the ceremony, is the face the Empire wishes to present. But you should understand what lies beneath. I'm listening, Your Highness. The Velthrin Empire values strength above all else, physical prowess, military might. It's why many in the High Command oppose an alliance with humans. They see your species as physically inferior. Hayes nodded slowly. Because we're smaller. Among other reasons, she turned to face him directly. But I have studied your history, Commander. Humans have faced physically superior opponents before and prevailed through innovation, adaptation, and what you call thinking outside the box. These are qualities many Gulthrans dismiss to our detriment. You don't share that view. A subtle change came over her expression, a momentary vulnerability quickly masked. Let's just say I understand the limitations of judging capability by size alone. The conversation was interrupted by the approach of a Velthran officer, one of General Croth's aides, Hayes recalled. Your Highness, the officer said, pointedly ignoring Hayes. General Croth requests your presence. Linar's expression cooled noticeably. Inform the general I will attend him when my diplomatic duties permit. The officer's scales darkened slightly. Anger, Hayes guessed. The general emphasized urgency, and I emphasize propriety. Our guests deserve my full attention. Her voice held a steel edge despite its softness. That will be all, Lieutenant. After a moment of tense silence, the officer bowed stiffly and departed. My apologies, Commander, Linner said once they were alone. You've witnessed one of our cultural tensions. No apology necessary, Your Highness. Hayes studied her with newfound interest. Despite being physically smaller than every Velthran he'd encountered, she had just firmly held her ground against what was clearly a challenge to her authority. We should both return to our duties, she said, but I hope we might continue our conversation another time. I believe there is much our peoples could learn from each other if certain prejudices can be overcome. As Hayes watched her leave, he reflected that the diplomatic briefings had missed something crucial about Velthran culture. They had emphasized the importance of physical strength, but failed to identify what he had just witnessed, a different kind of strength altogether, one that had nothing to do with physical stature, and he suspected the princess possessed it in abundance. Strength beyond mesure. The conference chamber hummed with tension. 3 days into negotiations, the human delegation and Velthran High Command had reached an impasse. General Croth stood at the tactical display, his massive form casting a shadow over the projection of disputed star systems. These sectors must remain under Velthran protection, he insisted. Your colonies are too vulnerable. Your fleet too small to defend them against the Cretaxi. Admiral Voss's expression remained neutral, though Hayes could see the tightness around her eyes. With respect, General, Earth has successfully defended those colonies for 15 years. What you call protection sounds remarkably like occupation. Scales rippling with barely contained irritation, Croft leaned forward. The Cretaxi you face are merely scouts when their main fleet arrives. Perhaps we should adjourn for today, Princess Linar interrupted smoothly, rising from her seat at the side of the chamber. Both delegations have presented valuable perspectives that deserve careful consideration. Croft's eyes narrowed at the interruption, but Emperor Thaxon nodded his massive head. My daughter speaks wisely. We will reconvene tomorrow. As the chamber emptied, Hayes noticed Linar lingering, apparently reviewing notes on her datapad. He approached after ensuring Admiral Voss was engaged with the Emperor's senior advisors. Skillful intervention, Your Highness, he said quietly. Linar glanced up, a hint of surprise in her expression. Commander Hayes, I'm not sure what you mean. The negotiation was headed toward a breakdown. You redirected it. The princess studied him for a moment before a small smile touched her lips. You notice more than most, Commander. She gestured toward a side corridor. Walk with me. They moved through less traveled passages of the palace, eventually emerging into a small garden courtyard, an unexpected oasis of green amid the metal and stone architecture of the Velthran capital. This is my private retreat, Linar explained. Few Velthrans appreciate horticulture. Hayes surveyed the carefully arranged plants, recognizing some as similar to Earth species, but others entirely alien. It's beautiful and practical. Several of these plants have medicinal properties. She seated herself on a stone bench, gesturing for Hayes to join her. You're right about the negotiations. General Croft pushes for concessions your people cannot accept, and you disagree with his approach. I disagree with unnecessary conflict when mutual benefit is possible. She sighed, a surprisingly human gesture. The Cretaxi threat is real, Commander. Neither humans nor Velthrans can stand against them alone. But my people, particularly our military leadership, struggle to accept alliance with those they consider lesser. Because we're smaller, Hayes said with a wry smile. Because you lack physical might by Velthran standards, she corrected. It is a cultural blindness that frustrates me deeply. Hayes studied her, seeing beneath her composed exterior to the isolation she must feel. Your Highness, may I speak candidly? She nodded, curiosity evident in her expression. I've observed how other Velthrans interact with you. They see your stature as a weakness, don't they? Linar's scales shifted subtly in color, the Velthran equivalent of a blush, Hayes guessed. It is not discussed directly in your presence out of diplomatic courtesy, but it affects your standing. She looked away, toward a flowering plant with luminescent blooms. I am the first female of the imperial line in 7 generations to be born. Small. My father had no other heirs, so tradition could not completely set me aside. But yes, many question my fitness to eventually rule. Despite your obvious intelligence and diplomatic skill, those qualities are not highly valued in Velthran culture, she said simply. Physical strength, military prowess, these are the measures of worth. She looked back at him with sudden intensity. Your Admiral Voss commands respect, despite being physically smaller than you. How does humanity measure leadership? Hayes considered the question. Differently across cultures, but generally through results. Intelligence, judgment, integrity, the ability to inspire others. These often matter more than physical attributes. And this is why your civilization has advanced so rapidly. You utilize all your talents, not just physical might. She leaned forward slightly. The Velthran Empire has conquered many worlds, Commander Hayes, but we have stopped evolving. Our fixation on physical strength has become our limitation. Their conversation was interrupted by a sharp alert from Linar's communication device. Her expression grew serious as she read the message. What is it? Hayes asked. A Cretaxi scouting vessel has been detected at the edge of the Velthran defense perimeter, she said, rising quickly. We should return to the main palace immediately. By the time they reached the war room, both delegations had assembled. General Croft was already issuing orders to the fleet. 3 assault carriers will intercept and destroy the intruder, he announced. Is that wise? Admiral Voss asked. If it's just a scout, capturing it could provide valuable intelligence. Croft's dismissive glance spoke volumes. Velthrans do not take half measures. Admiral, we send a message of strength. Hayes saw Linar step forward. General, the Admiral's suggestion has merit. A captured scout ship would yield technological and tactical insights. The General's scales darkened. Princess, with respect, this is a military matter, which affects our ongoing diplomatic negotiations, she countered smoothly. If we are to forge an alliance against the Cretaxi, should we not demonstrate our ability to work together now? Emperor Thaxon, who had been listening silently, raised a massive hand. What do you propose, daughter? Linar moved to the tactical display. A joint operation. 1 Velthran assault carrier, accompanied by the human cruiser in orbit. Our strength combined with their stealth technology could disable rather than destroy the scout. Croft began to object, but the Emperor silenced him with a gesture. An interesting proposition. Admiral Voss, would your vessel be capable of such a mission? Voss exchanged a quick glance with Hayes before answering. The UES Sentinel has advanced stealth capabilities that could approach the Cretaxi undetected. With Velthran firepower to disable their engines once we're in position, capture is feasible. Then it is decided, the Emperor declared. A joint operation, as the Princess suggests. Hayes noticed the look of barely contained fury on General Croft's face as the war room emptied to prepare for the mission. The General stopped Linar at the doorway, towering over her. You overstep, Princess, he growled, low enough that Hayes barely caught the words. Military matters are not for those who have never seen combat. Linar's response was too quiet to hear, but the way Croft's scales rippled with anger suggested she had not backed down. Later, as Hayes prepared to return to the Sentinel for the mission, he found Linar waiting near the shuttle bay. Commander, she greeted him. I wish to convey my hopes for the mission's success personally. Thank you, Your Highness. It was a sound tactical suggestion you made. She glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. General Croft will ensure it fails. Hayes stilled. What? He cannot openly defy my father, but he will not allow the plan to succeed. It would validate cooperation with humans, and worse in his eyes, validate my strategic thinking. Her voice held no self-pity, only determination. Be wary. The Velthran assault carrier captain is Croft's protege. Why are you telling me this? Because I believe in this alliance, Commander Hayes. I believe our peoples need each other to survive what's coming. Her eyes held his. And because you are perhaps the only one who sees me as I am, not as what I appear to be. The insight struck Hayes deeply. In her, he recognized something familiar. The struggle to be valued for one's mind and heart rather than external attributes. Throughout human history, people had faced similar prejudices based on appearance, gender, or background. What would you have me do? Be prepared to take command of the operation if necessary. The Sentinel's captain should know that the Velthran commander may prioritize destroying the Cretaxi ship over capturing it. Hayes nodded slowly. I understand. He hesitated, then added, Your Highness, in human history, some of our greatest leaders were those who were underestimated. A slight smile touched her lips. Then perhaps there is hope for me yet, Commander. She stepped back. Safe journey. I look forward to your successful return. As Hayes boarded the shuttle, he found himself reflecting on how quickly his perception of the princess had evolved. Initially, he had seen her as the other Velthrans did, defined by her smaller stature. Now he recognized in her a keen strategic mind and a quiet courage that had nothing to do with physical prowess. The mission unfolded much as Linar had predicted. The Sentinel approached the Critaxi scout under stealth, but at the crucial moment, the Velfrin assault carrier opened fire with full weapons rather than the precision strikes needed for disabling the target. "They're trying to destroy it," Captain Chen of the Sentinel said urgently as they watched the Varage. Hayes made a split-second decision. "Target the Critaxi's propulsion with our surgical lasers. We can still salvage this." The Sentinel's precision weapons fired, slicing through the Critaxi ship's engine section with minimal collateral damage. Before the Velfrin captain could finish the destruction, the scout was dead in space, damaged but largely intact. When they returned to Velfrin Prime with the captured vessel, the first intact Critaxi ship ever taken by either humans or Velfrins, the reception was mixed. Emperor Thaxen was pleased, General Croth furious, and Princess Linar quietly triumphant. The joint operation was successful beyond expectations, she announced in the war room, standing beside the tactical display showing the captured ship now in the orbital shipyard. Preliminary analysis already reveals critical vulnerabilities in Critaxi shielding that neither of our forces had previously identified. Croft's scales had darkened to a deep crimson. The operation deviated from command structure. The human vessel acted independently. To ensure success of the mission, Hayes countered, standing beside Admiral Voss. "Our actions preserved the target when it was about to be destroyed." The tension in the room was palpable until Emperor Thaxen raised a hand. "Results speak for themselves. This achievement will benefit both our peoples." He turned to Linar. "The operation was your suggestion, daughter. You will oversee the joint research team examining the captured vessel." Hayes caught the flash of surprise in Linar's eyes before she composed herself. "I am honored, Father." As the meeting dispersed, Hayes overheard a conversation between two Velfrin officers. "The Runt Princess got lucky," one muttered. "Or perhaps she's not as useless as we thought," the other replied thoughtfully. That strategy worked. It was a small shift, but Hayes recognized its significance. For perhaps the first time, Linar was being judged by her results rather than her stature. Later, when he encountered her in the corridor outside the research laboratory, he noticed a new confidence in her bearing. "Congratulations on your appointment, Your Highness." "Thank you, Commander." She glanced around before adding softly, "And thank you for ensuring the mission's success. I suspect Captain Chen received your warning about possible complications." Hayes smiled slightly. The captain was well prepared for contingencies. "Your intervention changed more than you know." Her voice grew serious. "For the first time, some of my people are seeing beyond my size to what I can contribute. It's an unfamiliar feeling. Being valued for who you are rather than how you appear." "Yes." She hesitated, then added, "In your culture, has it always been so? Judging people by their capabilities rather than their physical attributes?" Hayes gave a rueful laugh. "Hardly. Humanity has struggled with this throughout our history. We've judged people by their appearance, gender, the color of their skin, all irrelevant factors. We still struggle with it sometimes. Yet you overcame it enough to advance as you have. We recognized, eventually, that talent and intelligence aren't determined by outward appearance. That strength comes in many forms." He met her gaze directly. "As you've demonstrated." A subtle ripple of color passed through her scales, that Velfrin blush again. "Perhaps our peoples aren't so different after all, Commander. We both have our prejudices to overcome. And perhaps working together will help us overcome them faster," he suggested. "I believe it already has." She gestured toward the laboratory. "Shall we see what secrets our captured prize holds?" As they walked together, Hayes realized something fundamental had shifted between their peoples, and perhaps in the process, something had shifted within the Velfrin Empire itself, a small crack in a rigid belief system that had limited them for generations. All because a princess who had been dismissed for her size had proven that strength could be measured in ways far beyond the physical. "Or perhaps she's not as useless as we thought," the other replied thoughtfully. That strategy worked. It was a small shift, but Hayes recognized its significance. For perhaps the first time, Linner was being judged by her results rather than her stature. Later, when he encountered her in the corridor outside the research laboratory, he noticed a new confidence in her bearing. "Congratulations on your appointment, Your Highness." "Thank you, Commander." She glanced around before adding softly, "And thank you for ensuring the mission's success. I suspect Captain Chen received your warning about possible complications." Hayes smiled slightly. "The captain was well prepared for contingencies. Your intervention changed more than you know." Her voice grew serious. "For the first time, some of my people are seeing beyond my size to what I can contribute. It's an unfamiliar feeling. Being valued for who you are rather than how you appear." "Yes." She hesitated, then added, "In your culture, has it always been so? Judging people by their capabilities rather than their physical attributes?" Hayes gave a rueful laugh. "Hardly. Humanity has struggled with this throughout our history. We've judged people by their appearance, gender, the color of their skin, all irrelevant factors. We still struggle with it sometimes. Yet you overcame it enough to advance as you have. We recognized, eventually, that talent and intelligence aren't determined by outward appearance. That strength comes in many forms." He met her gaze directly. "As you've demonstrated." A subtle ripple of color passed through her scales. That Velthrin blush again. "Perhaps our peoples aren't so different after all, Commander. We both have our prejudices to overcome, and perhaps working together will help us overcome them faster," he suggested. "I believe it already has." She gestured toward the laboratory. "Shall we see what secrets our captured prize holds?" As they walked together, Hayes realized something fundamental had shifted between their peoples, and perhaps, in the process, something had shifted within the Velthrin Empire itself. A small crack in a rigid belief system that had limited them for generations. All because a princess who had been dismissed for her size had proven that strength could be measured in ways far beyond the physical. "The analysis was completed yesterday. It's in the report I submitted." She stopped, realizing from Croft's expression that he had never read it. The command center shook as distant explosions grew closer. A communications officer called out, "Orbital defenses are failing. Critaxi ships are entering low orbit." Hayes watched Croft order a last desperate counterattack, committing the remaining Velthrin capital ships to a frontal assault on the Critaxi flagship. It was a traditional Velthrin tactic, bold, direct, and, in this case, likely suicidal. Linnar moved to her father's side. "Father, we need a different approach. The Critaxi have studied our tactics. Direct confrontation will fail." Emperor Thaxon hesitated, torn between tradition and the evidence unfolding before him. "Your Majesty," Hayes said, stepping forward. "Princess Linnar's analysis of the captured scout has given her insights into Critaxi vulnerabilities that might not be immediately apparent." The Emperor's gaze shifted between his daughter, the human commander, and General Croft. Another explosion rocked the command center, closer this time. "Speak quickly, daughter," he said finally. Linnar moved to the tactical display, her fingers flying over the controls. "The Critaxi communication network has a specific frequency pattern we identified from the scout ship. Their battlefield coordination depends on it." She highlighted several points in the Critaxi formation. "These are their communication hubs. If we can disrupt them simultaneously, their formation will fragment. A coordinated strike would require precision timing," Hayes added, "and ships positioned here, here, and here." He indicated points on the display. General Croft scoffed. "Redirecting our forces now would leave the capital exposed. This is the desperate theory of a princess who has never commanded in battle, and a human woe." "Enough." Emperor Thaxon's voice thundered through the command center. He studied the tactical display, then looked at the image of his fleet being systematically destroyed by the Critaxi advance. "The traditional approach is failing, General." His voice was heavy with the weight of centuries of Velthrin military doctrine being questioned. "We will try my daughter's strategy." The next minutes were a blur of activity as Hayes worked with Linnar to coordinate the attack. The remaining Velthran ships were redirected, joined by the UES Sentinel, which had been holding in reserve near the planet. Targeting solutions uploaded. Linar announced, "All ships report ready." Emperor Thaxon gave a single nod. "Execute." The synchronized attack struck the Cretaxi communication hubs precisely as planned. For a breathless moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then the Cretaxi formation began to falter. Ships that had been moving in perfect coordination suddenly shifted erratically.